Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer heads to Washington for talks on Gaza and Iran ahead of Prime Minister Netanyahu's July 7th meeting with the US President Donald Trump. Trump has said that the US will send a tariff rate letter to Japan ahead of expected hikes on July 9th, complaining Tokyo is spoiled for not importing US rice, according to media reports. Japan's top spokesperson responded that it will not sacrifice its agriculture sector in these trade talks. Ousted former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol defied a summons from a special prosecutor in a martial law probe, citing preparations for an upcoming hearing despite facing possible arrest, according to reports. Over 14 million people could die globally due to Trump's administration's cuts to U.S. foreign aid, according to a study published in the Lancet. Co-author David Rassella warned the impact could match a pandemic or war for vulnerable nations. G7 foreign ministers have expressed support for the Israel-Iran ceasefire and urged a resumption of talks to revive a deal on Iran's nuclear program, according to a joint statement. They also condemned threats against the UN nuclear watchdog chief. Istanbul's prosecutor has ordered the arrest of 3 Lehman magazine journalists over a profit cartoon that sparked outrage, media reported. Meanwhile, Turkey's forestry minister said wildfires forced the evacuation of 4 villages and 2 neighborhoods amid strong winds as wildfires continue for the second day. China has imposed sanctions on former Philippine Senator Francis Tolentino for his egregious conduct on China-related issues, according to a statement from Beijing's foreign ministry. Meanwhile, the Philippine embassy in China has yet to comment. Taiwan will stage a simulated Chinese blockade and invasion during its Han Kuang military drills from July 9th, mobilizing over 22,000 reservists in an unprecedented exercise, according to media reports. President Lai warned Taiwan is facing China's war without gun smoke amid growing military pressure. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will visit the White House next Monday, July 7th, for talks with the US President Donald Trump, a US official has confirmed. The meeting comes as Washington intensifies its push for a ceasefire in Gaza. This marks Netanyahu's 3rd visit since Trump returned to power in January, more than any other world leader. Trump has said he hopes for a Gaza truce within a week. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed the planned meeting, noting both leaders had shown interest. This has been a priority for the president since he took office, to end this brutal war in Gaza, she told reporters. The visit follows Trump's recent appeal on Truth Social urging Israel to make the deal in Gaza. Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer is expected in Washington this week to finalize details ahead of Netanyahu's arrival. Trump surprised Netanyahu during their first 2025 meeting in February by suggesting the US could take over Gaza. The Israeli leader also visited in April. The recent end of Israel's 12-day war with Iran has opened a potential window for a ceasefire with Hamas. Trump is eager to add another diplomatic success to his resume ahead of the November election. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Jordan Cope, he's a Middle East affairs expert, joining us live from Erfurt, Germany. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. With Netanyahu making his 3rd White House visit this year, does this show Israel's full alignment with Trump's push for a Gaza ceasefire, or are there still big differences on how to get there, according to you?
I don't think there is a full alignment. Israel, at the end of the day, is its own independent country. and Israel has realized significant military achievements over the past several weeks, now effectively in control of 75% of the Gaza Strip. And even though Israel has, with the United States' help, agreed to its ceasefire proposals, Hamas still fails to agree to any of them, ultimately leaving Israel alone with its hand out, trying to find a way to free all the hostages and get to an end of the war. And yet Hamas ultimately has refused continuously to agree to a ceasefire deal because it knows at the end of the day that its time is limited and it can't afford to appear weak. And so that's why Hamas has continued, increasingly so, to falsify numbers in terms of casualty counts throughout the war, especially more recently.
Now, looking at the timing, Trump's push for Gaza deal comes right after the war with Iran. Does this create real momentum here for a truce with Hamas, or could it just be an election year photo op with little substance?
Donald Trump has certainly pushed to try to free all the hostages, and rightfully so. It's one of Israel's primary objectives right now, but also one of Israel's primary objectives is to avoid leaving Hamas in power and enabling future October 7th in the future that will create cyclical problems in which more Israelis in the future will become hostage and perpetuate ultimate war between Israel and Hamas in the future. So regarding Donald Trump's motives, Donald Trump wants to be a peacemaker around the world. He wants to forge deals that people previously considered impossible. And of course, he wants to free hostages, not just on America's side or American prisoners as he has in some countries in Latin America and elsewhere, but he also wants to help his ally in Israel be able to free their own right now, achieve the impossible, and ultimately boost his foreign policy achievements early within his second term.
Jordan, you will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Fresh calls for a ceasefire are growing as Israel's military campaign in Gaza claims dozens more lives. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency says at least 51 people were killed by Israeli strikes on Monday, including 24 in a deadly strike on a seafront rest area in Gaza City. Eyewitnesses described scenes of horror, with body parts scattered, blood on the ground, and families scrambling for cover. The targeted spot was a popular area for civilians seeking internet access, refreshments, and moments of respite. The Israeli army said it is looking into the reports, but has not yet issued a formal statement. Separately, another 27 people were reported killed across Gaza, including 11 near aid distribution points. Witnesses claim Israeli drones and ground troops opened fire as people gathered for food. The escalation comes despite new momentum for peace following the end of Israel's 12-day war with Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump has urged Israel to make the deal in Gaza, while Qatar says a path towards a new ceasefire may be opening. But Israel's military remains focused on eliminating Hamas and securing the release of hostages. Defense Minister Israel Katz said Israel will press on until its objectives are met. Since Hamas's deadly cross-border attack on October 7, 2023, which killed over 1,200 people, Israel's response has killed more than 56,500 people in Gaza. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, the UN says these figures are reliable and that the vast majority of the dead are civilians. As the toll mounts, peace mediators and civilian groups are pushing hard for a durable truce. Now we have guest joining us for this discussion, Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East expert. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, reports of civilians killed at a seafront rest area and near aid points again. How can Israel maintain that its campaign is targeting Hamas effectively without crossing clear humanitarian red lines?
I mean, of course, every civilian life lost is a tragedy in war. Civilian lives, unfortunately, are an expected collateral in any war. According to the United Nations, 90% of all casualties in war are civilian casualties. But it should be noted that in this war, Hamas thrives off of misinformation, and the numbers being reported from that seafront property are being actually published and issued by the Palestinian Civil Defense, which is a government-run agency accountable to the Palestinian Ministry of Interior in the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. So in other words, it's a Hamas-controlled agency. It's important to note that at the end of the day, that Hamas has lied continuously throughout the war about the casualty count. It initially noted that the civilian death toll was actually thousands higher, and then eventually Hamas changed it secretly, which was later caught by international media. Statisticians such as those at the University of Pennsylvania have frequently debunked Hamas's statistics, and Hamas, when it was finally getting protested by many Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, realized that it had to show that the war actually wasn't as bad as Hamas once claimed in terms of casualty count, and it ultimately once again fudged the figures to show that more likely the actual casualty count, of which 72% supposedly were men, which goes to show that Israel was more likely than not actually targeting combatants, and combatants of the age where they were likely to be fighting. And so Hamas thrives off of misinformation because its ultimate goal is to delegitimize Israel, and it seeks to portray Israel as targeting civilians. But even with Hamas's statistics, it goes to show that Israel, unlike most other nations, has actually managed to reduce the civilian count and the proportionality thereof to record lows in modern-day urban warfare, protecting civilians, providing evacuation routes, providing millions of warnings, whether through phone calls or through leaflets. Israel has gone far and beyond as well to provide humanitarian aid, providing over 1.7 million tons of food and other resources throughout the war, and providing more humanitarian aid during this war than actually before the war in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, Jordan. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has urged an end to the war in Gaza, now stretching beyond 20 months, saying it's time to stop the bloodshed and bring hostages home. His call adds to growing domestic and international pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to halt the conflict. Let's listen in to the Israeli opposition.
הגיע הזמן לסיים את המלחמה בעזה. לעשות עסקת חטופים ולסיים את המלחמה. למדינת ישראל, לביטחון ישראל, לא צומחת כבר שום תועלת מהמשך המלחמה. רק נזק. נזק ביטחוני, נזק מדיני, נזק כלכלי. זוהי גם עמדת הצבא. הרמטכ"ל אייל זמיר הופיע אתמול בפני הקבינט ואמר על עזה, הדרג המדיני צריך להחליט מה היעד הבא. משמעות המשפט הזה היא שלצבא אין יותר יעדים ממשיים בעזה. אני בעד חיסול החמאס, אבל החמאס לא יחוסל כל עוד לא ייכנס לעזה שלטון אלטרנטיבי. היינו צריכים כבר לפני שנה להתחיל מהלך כדי להכניס את המצרים לנהל את עזה יחד עם מדינות ערביות נוספות. אני מבין ששרי הימין הקיצוני רוצים שנכבוש את עזה ונשלוט בה לנצח. חיילים ימשיכו למות, משלם המיסים הישראלי, מעמד הביניים הישראלי החבוט והחבול, ישלם על בניית כבישים ובתי ספר וניקוי הרחובות של תושבי עזה. זו הזיה. רוב מוחלט של אזרחי ישראל לא שם.
Lapid's remarks come as Defense Minister Israel Katz declared the campaign in Gaza is nearing completion. We are now facing the completion of the Gaza campaign and the achievement of its objectives, first and foremost, the release of all hostages and the defeat of Hamas, Katz said during a high-level meeting with Netanyahu and Army Chief Eyal Zamir. Let's listen in.
אנחנו ניצבים כעת עם הפנים להשלמת המערכה בעזה ולהשגת יעדיה, ובראשם שחרור כל החטופים והכנעת החמאס. יש לנו עוד משימות רבות בזירות השונות ועבודה.
However, the push for a ceasefire has drawn sharp criticism from far-right ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who insist the war must continue. They argue that after Israel's recent military success against Iran, the momentum should be used to finish Hamas decisively. The war must not end now, Ben-Gvir said in a statement. We must continue until Hamas is eliminated completely. while Netanyahu has not publicly commented to a timeline. Officials suggest he is balancing between military objectives and mounting diplomatic pressure, especially ahead of his upcoming White House visit. Now we're going back to our discussion with Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East expert joining us live from Erfurt, Germany. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now, with this conflict dragging on for over 20 months, is bringing the hostages home through negotiations now the only realistic option, or does a military solution still hold any weight according to you?
It's not necessarily the only diplomatic option, because what I've been reading, at least according to rumors, is that Hamas has still yet once again refused any ceasefire proposal at the end of the day that would release all hostages, because Hamas is not prepared to relinquish power. And this is one of the most important objectives to the war that must be achieved, because Hamas's leadership has time and time again expressed its commitment to committing future October 7th style attacks in the future. And if Israel ultimately wants to free all hostages, both now and the future, it must ensure that Hamas does not have the power, the resources, and the funding that comes therewith with its power to be able to commit such attacks in the future. I'm hearing rumors right now that the United States is trying to propose a ceasefire proposal that would ultimately call on Hamas's leadership to leave the Gaza Strip. And there are currently competing militias on the ground in the Gaza Strip, such as the Abu Shabaab militia, which is currently fighting Hamas for power. And sometimes they do coordinate with the Israeli officials in their efforts to compete for power. And so it's not quite so easy how to ascertain how Israel will ultimately get Hamas out of power and get all the hostages home. But Israel has certainly prioritized more recently, now more than ever, after the 12-day war, the hostages' release and liberation. And yet the primary obstacle still remains Hamas, which knows the longer that this war drags out, the longer it achieves its ultimate goal, which is to delegitimize Israel, which Hamas has made very clear it hopes to destroy.
Will stay with us for our next news as well. The U.S. Senate's high-stakes vote, a Rama session, dragged into its 12th hour late Monday night, with senators informed that at least 10 more amendment votes remain before a final decision can be made on President Donald Trump's sweeping legislative package. The marathon voting event, a procedural staple for budget-related legislation, has seen lawmakers from both parties propose a flurry of amendments to what Trump has described as his big, beautiful bill. But with no end in sight, the path to final passage remains long and uncertain. According to a Senate official, the 10 announced votes are not necessarily the last. More are expected to follow, prolonging the debate and delaying the final floor vote. Senators and aides, many of whom have been on the chamber floor for hours, are bracing for a late night or even early morning finish. Trump's bill, a centerpiece of his domestic agenda, includes sweeping changes in tax policy, immigration, enforcement, and federal spending. The president has lobbied hard for its passage, calling it a must-win for his administration. While some Republicans have expressed frustration over the pace, Democrats are using the amendment to process to highlight policy concerns and force tough votes ahead of the November elections. As the vote Rama stretches on, the Senate floor remains tense and fatigued, with the fate of the bill still hanging on the balance. Now we stay in U.S. as the U.S. Senate inches towards a final vote on President Donald Trump's sweeping big beautiful bill. Billionaire Elon Musk is escalating his opposition, warning of political consequences if the legislation passes. In a fiery post on his social platform X, Musk slammed lawmakers who support the bill despite pledges to cut spending. Every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and then immediately voted for the biggest debt increase in history should hang their head in shame. Musk wrote Monday, and they will lose their primary next year if it is the last thing I do on this earth. Just hours later, Musk upped the ante. If the insane spending bill passes, the America Party will be formed the next day, he declared, hinting at a possible break with both major parties. Musk has spent weeks criticizing Trump's policy package, with the Congressional Budget Office estimates will add nearly $3.3 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. The House version, by comparison, would increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion. Describing the bill as debt slavery, Musk has clashed openly with Trump, including a heated exchange earlier this month, with his threat to form a new political party could reshape the 2026 midterm landscape, especially among fiscally conservative voters. Despite mounting criticism, Trump continues to push for passage, calling the bill essential to rebuilding America's greatness. Now we stay in North America. The White House has said Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney gave in to pressure from President Donald Trump and agreed to drop a controversial tax on big U.S. tech firms. Let's listen in to what White House Press Secretary had to say.
For example, Prime Minister Carney in Canada caved to President Trump in the United States of America. And President Trump knows how to negotiate, and he knows that he is governing the best country and the best economy in this world, on this planet. And every country on the planet needs to have good trade relationships with the United States. And it was a mistake for Canada to vow to implement that tax that would have hurt our tech companies here in the United States.
Prime Minister Carney told journalists in Ottawa that Canada dropped the tax as part of a broader trade deal and reopened talks with the U.S. Trump earlier blasted the tax as a blatant attack and halted trade negotiations. Even threatening new tariffs, Canada then suspended collection of the tax, which was due, and announced plans to repeat it through legislation. White House Economic Advisor Kevin Hassett confirmed that trade talks between Washington and Ottawa are now back on track. The now scrapped digital services tax would have imposed a 3% levy on U.S. tech giants like Amazon, Meta, Google, and Apple, targeting Canadian revenue above $20 million. Canadian Finance Minister Francois Philippe Champagne said that the tax was intended to ensure tech firms paid fairly for revenues generated from Canadians. He emphasized that Canada always preferred a global tax agreement. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre slammed the move, saying Carney backed down at the 11th hour and urged him to demand the U.S. lift tariff on softwood lumber in return. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick thanked Canada, saying the tax would have stifled American innovation and threatened any future trade deal. The tax, first announced in 2020, was expected to cost tech companies over $2 billion Canadian dollars in its first year, as it would have applied retroactively to July 2022. Ottawa had hoped to raise nearly $6 billion over 5 years. Now we move on to Asia. U.S. President Donald Trump is turning up the heat on trade negotiations, expressing frustration over Japan's refusal to import American-grown rice. In a post on Truth Social, Trump accused countries of being spoiled when dealing with the United States. He pointed to Japan's massive rice shortage and questioned why it still refuses to buy U.S. rice. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that countries may soon be notified if sharply higher tariffs as the July 9 deadline looms. Tariffs are set to snap back to levels of up to 50% unless deals are reached. Trump repeated his criticism of Japan's auto trade practices, calling them unfair. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said Trump will meet with his trade team to finalize rates for countries that aren't negotiating in good faith. Bessent added that while some of countries are working towards deals, those holding out could face tougher tariffs. Japan lead negotiator Ryosei Akazawa said Tokyo will keep working towards a deal while defending national interests, and warned that a 25% auto tariff would seriously hurt Japan's economy. Meanwhile, the European Union is open to a deal that keeps a 10% US tariff, but warns the US to lower duties in key areas like pharma, alcohol, and aircraft. Britain has already struck a deal under similar terms, locking in a 10% tariff while gaining access for jet engines and beef. Now we move on to our next news. In a major policy shift, US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order terminating the Syria sanctions program. The White House says the move aims to support Syria's reconstruction after years of devastating civil war and to end its isolation from the global financial system. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt has commented on this. Let's listen in.
This afternoon, the president will be signing an executive order to terminate the United States sanctions program on Syria, and this is in an effort to promote and support the country's path to stability and peace. The order will remove sanctions on Syria while maintaining sanctions on the former President Assad, his associates, human rights abusers, drug traffickers, persons linked to chemical weapons activities, ISIS and their affiliates, and Iranian proxies.
This comes after President Trump's surprise meeting in May with Syria's new leader Ahmed al-Sharaa in Riyadh, alongside Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, signaling a sweeping shift in U.S. policy towards Syria. Assad was toppled in December by Islamist-led rebels, and Syria has since begun rebuilding diplomatic relations. Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shibani praised Trump's decision on Platform X, saying it lifts the obstacle to economic recovery and opens the door to long-awaited reconstruction and development. The executive order also directs the U.S. Secretary of State to review the designations of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the rebel group once led by Sharaa, and Syria's status as a state sponsor of terrorism. The White House added that Washington will continue to monitor Damascus's commitment to key priorities, including normalizing ties with Israel, expelling foreign terrorists, and banning Palestinian militant groups. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Jordan Cope, he's a Middle East expert joining us live from Germany. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now looking at this, could ending Syria's isolation from the global financial system open the door for much needed reconstruction, or will it mainly benefit corrupt elites and Iran-backed networks according to the situation now?
I don't think it's going to immediately benefit any Iran-backed networks. It seems that this new administration under Ahmed al-Sharaa, still one confusing to figure out what its ultimate goal is, but it's certainly one that is anti-Assad, who was previously aligned with Iran. So I've seen recently that apparently the Syrian pound has grown by 25% as a result of the sanctions being relieved. The question, though, ultimately is what is going to happen with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which the Secretary of State of the United States is now tasked to review and ultimately to determine if this Salafi jihadist terrorist organization will remain designated as such. And so it's an exciting opportunity to perhaps see what might emerge from Syria in the near future. It definitely seems that this is probably part of a greater package that might ultimately see the United States forge a new page forward for Syria, which might also include some sort of normalization or new set of relations with Israel in the near future. Things definitely seem to be changing, and rapidly so, with Syria. The question is what lies beneath the scenes and what is currently being negotiated with the United States and perhaps even its ally, Israel, regarding the future of Syria.
Thank you, Jordan, for your insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. British police have launched a criminal investigation into musician Bob Dylan and Irish rap group Kneecap after their controversial performances at the Glastonbury Music Festival. Officers are reviewing video and audio footage from Saturday's sets where Dylan chanted death to the IDF on stage, targeting the Israeli military amid the war in Gaza. Kneecap also led chants against British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and condemned Israel in front of a large crowd. Police say they are investigating possible public order offenses and will consider applicable hate crime legislation. In a statement, they said there is absolutely no place in society for hate, acknowledging the widespread global response to the incident. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Starmer has criticized the BBC for streaming Dylan's set live as a media regulator. Ofcom now examines the broadcaster's decision. UK Culture Minister Lisa Nandy has weighed in on this incident. Let's listen in.
As a government, we strongly support freedom of expression, and as Culture Secretary, I will robustly defend the independence of our broadcasters and the right to artistic expression. But we do not accept that incitement to violence, hate speech or anti-Semitism is art. There is a clear difference between speaking out for Palestine, which is the right of everybody in this House and everybody in our country, and anti-Semitism, which is not and which will never be.
Now we have guest joining us live on this discussion, Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East affairs expert. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now looking at this, could launching a criminal probe into artists set a worrying precedent for policing political speech at music events, or is it necessary to draw a clear line on what's acceptable in public discourse?
I will clarify that, generally speaking, as an American, I'm as pro-free speech as it gets. I'm more of an absolutist than I would be one who would want to regulate any sort of form of speech. However, we're talking about the United Kingdom, where free speech is not so absolute, and in fact, there is considered crimes for certain types of hate speech. So whatever the standard is, I would like it enforced equally across the spectrum when we see such hateful speech manifest. And in terms of the UK and the standards that it set according to its own speech codes, what certainly happened definitely crossed the line, and it should be treated accordingly to whatever the standards are. Calling for the deaths of, in absolute terms, of everybody in the IDF, one of the most moral and humane militaries in the world, is one of the most barbaric things I've heard in recent memory, especially in regards to having politicized this event to call for mass deaths of people who belong to the world's only Jewish state. And the timing couldn't have been any worse, just 20 months after one of the worst massacres of Jews in modern memory, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The even more repulsive was the fact that BBC continued to live stream such footage despite well knowing and having been accused of anti-Semitic incidents in recent memory. It's one of the most repulsive things I've seen, and it's to no coincidence that Donald Trump probably rightfully revoked, and his administration revoked, the visas of Bob Dylan from being able to enter the United States. What I've also heard that was not per se featured or has been documented as such were some anti-Semitic rants that he went on before he actually made that speech. And so Bob Dylan is a hypocrite of the highest order as well. In 2021, I believe, he made a tweet about how people should just perform if they are going to be performing at concerts and not be going into these type of rants, which he definitely crossed a big red line.
Right. Thank you, Jordan. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. UK's Home Secretary moves to ban Palestine Action as a terror group to fight back in court. In a swift move that could see pro-Palestinian campaign group Palestine Action banned by the end of the week, Britain's Home Secretary Yvette Cooper formally began the process to designate the group as a terrorist organization. The decision comes after activists from the group vandalized 2 planes at a British Air Force base in southern England earlier this month. Cooper told Parliament that the group, along with 2 others, the neo-Nazi maniacs, murder cult, and the Russian Imperial Movement, met the threshold for proscription under the Terrorism Act. Palestine Action is pushing back. The group announced it will challenge the move at an urgent High Court hearing in London. It calls the ban an attack on free speech and democratic freedoms, as is seeking an injunction to halt the ban. Co-founder Huda Amori warned the ban would have far-reaching implications for freedom of expression and protests in the UK. Rights groups, including Amnesty International, have backed the challenge. The government argues the group's long history of criminal damage, including actions at a Thales defense plant in Glasgow and against Israeli-owned Elbit Systems in Bristol, justifies as its proscription. But Palestine Action insists its activism is non-violent civil disobedience aimed at exposing Britain's support for Israeli military actions. The group says spraying red paint on warplanes and disrupting arms factories is not terrorism. Parliament is expected to debate the measure on 2nd and 3rd July, given Labour's commanding majority. The ban could take effect as early as July 5th. Now we are going back to our discussion with Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East expert, joining us live from Erfurt, Germany. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now, Palestine Action and rights groups call this an attack on free speech. And earlier in discussion, you mentioned that you are for free speech, but where should the line be drawn between non-violent civil disobedience and acts that risk national security or public safety in this case?
These are certainly acts that violate not just national security precedents, but they also threaten the foreign policy of the United Kingdom. This is not a matter of free speech in the slightest. This is a matter of engaging in illegal sabotage efforts, illegal acts such as vandalism, illegal acts such as trespassing. One's free speech is no longer free speech when it violates another's rights. And what is happening here is not speech, it's the action, it's the vandalism, it's the trespassing, it's the threats. It's literally creating obstacles to one's national security apparatus and resources. This is not free speech in the slightest. They are gaslighting people in terms of what is actually free speech. These people do not respect the free speech of others. They don't even respect the property of others. These people are, unfortunately, very inappropriate in the way they go about things. And unfortunately, they need to be educated as to what the law is, because they don't even know what free speech is and what the protections are under the law. And it's a shame that they continue to obstruct civil society and continue to obstruct the government and its means of operating when it comes to protecting citizens of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Jordan, for sharing that insight. Now you will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Now, looking at South America, authorities in Mexico say they've found the bodies of 20 people, several of them decapitated, on a highway bridge in Sinaloa, a region torn by rival factions of the Sinaloa drug cartel. Prosecutors revealed that 4 headless corpses were lying by the roadside, while 16 bodies were stuffed inside an abandoned vehicle. Investigators also found 5 human heads packed inside a bag at the scene. All the victims had gunshot wounds. Local media claimed that gang members had hung 4 decapitated bodies upside down from the bridge, a brutal signature move by criminal cartels, though officials have yet to confirm that. Violence has escalated across Sinaloa since authorities captured cartel co-founder Ismael El Mayo Zambada nearly a year ago. Zambada claimed that one of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's sons kidnapped him and forced him onto a private jet to the United States, where El Chapo is already serving a life sentence. The deadly power struggle between El Chapo's loyalists and Zambada's faction has claimed over 1,200 lives, according to official data. The Sinaloa cartel, one of 6 Mexican cartels designated as terror groups by the U.S., continues to wreak havoc. Mexico has recorded nearly 480,000 violent deaths and over 120,000 missing persons since 2006, most linked to drug warfare. Now we move on to the Middle East. Tensions are simmering once again in northern Iraq after rockets struck a military air base in Kirkuk. 2 Katyusha rockets hit the military section of Kirkuk airport, slightly wounding 2 security personnel. A third rocket slammed into a house in the city's Uruba neighborhood, causing material damage. According to a senior security official, one of the rockets failed to explode. The airport hosts Iraqi army units, federal police, and Hashid al-Shabi forces, a formal pro-Iranian militia now part of Iraq's regular military. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, and according to the airport authority, flights were not disrupted. Iraq has long been target of rocket and drone strikes, often linked to proxy tensions in the region. Just last week, unidentified drones struck radar facilities at military bases in Baghdad and southern Iraq, hours before a ceasefire ended the 12-day Iran-Israel war. The government has launched an investigation into both incidents, but so far no perpetrator has been identified. While Iraq has seen relative calm in recent months, these latest strikes have raised new concerns over security and stability in a region still grappling with decades of conflict. Now we are joined by guest Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East affairs expert joining us from Erfurt, Germany. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now, with this situation, given the recent Iran-Israel war and ongoing regional proxy battles, what more can Iraq's government do to prevent its territory from becoming a launch pad or battleground for other countries' conflicts?
It has long been a battleground through which Iran has sought to project its stake and influence for many, many years. Historically speaking, parts of Iraq were considered within the realm of Iranian empires. But what's quite concerning and confusing right now is where these Katyusha rockets were coming from. Katyusha rockets are exported from Russia and generally are exported to pro-Iranian militias. And so it's incredibly confusing why these rockets were fired, and because likely militias that might have had access to these rockets might have included Kataib Hezbollah, which aligns itself with Iran. It's questionable why the location and the destination was targeted. But at the end of the day, Iraq ultimately has sought in its current administration to have kind of its own independent regime that tries to keep some distance from both the United States, which has been heavily involved in the region since the Iraq War, and also from Iran, but at the same time has kind of leaned towards Iran in terms of its anti-American and anti-Israel sentiment, especially more recently, in which a US and an Israeli flag were displayed on the floor at a national ceremony, especially in light of recent religious festivities in the month of Muharram, which is currently being celebrated by many Shiites throughout Iraq. And so it remains confusing where the future course of Iraq will go. However, after the 12-day war and with Iran's influence on the decline, I also wouldn't be surprised if Iraq tried to distance itself a little bit more and more from Iran as its power continues to wane in the region.
Thank you, Jordan, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us for the next news as we stay in the Middle East. Fighters from the Kurdistan Workers' Party will begin disarming at a formal ceremony in Iraqi Kurdistan in early July, Kurdish media outlet Rudal has reported yesterday. The move marks a major step in ending a conflict that has lasted over 40 years and left more than 40,000 people dead. The disarmament ceremony expected between July 3rd and 10th in Sulaymaniyah comes 6 weeks after the PKK announced it would cease its guerrilla campaign against the Turkish state. According to sources cited by Rudal, the event will be a trust-building step in a broader reconciliation process with Ankara. The pro-Kurdish Dem party said preparations are underway for political tasks, including a planned meeting between its lawmakers and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on July 8th or 9th. Afterward, DEM members are expected to visit Imrali Island, where PKK founder Abdullah Öcalan has been imprisoned since 1999. We believe these developments will unfold next week, said Sezai Temelli, Vice President of DEM's parliamentary group. Erdogan, speaking after a cabinet meeting Monday, said Turkey was pleased with the progress and described the peace push as strategic amid regional shifts fueled by the Gaza war. The fighters, mostly stationed in Iraq's mountainous north, will reportedly return to their bases unarmed after the ceremony. Rudal clarified that none will be relocated to cities in the Kurdistan region. While full details remain unclear, Turkey says it will strictly monitor the process to ensure compliance. Now we are joined by guest for this discussion, Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East expert. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us throughout. Now, looking at this situation in Turkey with PKK disarmament ceremony, does it really mark the beginning of a lasting peace with Turkey, and with Ankara calling this peace push strategic amid wider regional turmoil like the Gaza war? And how much is this move about genuine reconciliation, according to you?
I don't think that this will mark the end of Turkey's tensions with the rest of the region. For sure, Turkey does not respect the sovereignty of many of its neighbors. It still has a presence in northern Syria. It still occupies part of northern Cyprus. Its state government TV stations in recent years have displayed maps showing Mosul, Iraq as part of Greater Turkey. Turkey still isn't satisfied with its borders, as was rendered by the Treaty of Lausanne. And Turkey definitely doesn't respect a lot of the sovereignty of other countries far and beyond in the Middle East. It continues to invest in a lot of development projects in East Jerusalem to assert its influence and to help reimagine the glory of its Ottoman Empire days that are no more. And so it's a bit confusing why the PKK, indeed a terrorist organization, why it currently has disbanded. It doesn't seem like Abdullah Öcalan will ultimately be getting out of prison. It seems that Turkey has ultimately decided to rule that out, even though he has now been in jail for 26 years. I definitely expect there to be more problems between Turkey and its abuse of its Kurdish population and the Kurds also beyond its sovereign borders throughout much of the Middle East and beyond. Turkey perceives them, unrightly so, as a threat, and in recent years has purged many Kurds from mayoral positions in Turkey, while also oppressing Kurds and their ability to use the Kurdish language within their own borders. One of the most famous Kurdish singers actually almost went to jail in Turkey for once singing in Kurdish at his concert, his name being Ibrahim Tatlıs's. And so it's quite confusing why the PKK is disbanding. It kind of commemorates almost an end in similar fashion to that in the IRA, but nonetheless, it is also a terrorist organization. And so it's confusing, I guess, how the future of Kurdish militants in Turkey will manifest in the future, but the PKK doesn't seem to be the future for that.
Thank you very much, Jordan Cope, for staying with us and bringing your expertise as a Middle East expert all the way from Germany. Now we move on to our next news. Looking at US, the White House has said that final touches are being made to a long-anticipated trade agreement with India, adding that an announcement from President Donald Trump and his trade team is expected very soon. Finalizing agreements you will hear from the president and his trade team very soon on India, a White House spokesperson told reporters yesterday. India remains a very strategic ally in the Asia Pacific, and the president has a very good relationship with Prime Minister Modi. Let's listen in to what the White House press secretary had to say.
The president said that last week, and it remains true. I actually just spoke to our Secretary of Commerce about it. He was in the Oval Office with the president. They are finalizing these agreements, and you'll hear from the president and his team, his trade team, very soon when it comes to India. Yes, I mean, look, India remains a very strategic ally in the Asia Pacific, and the president has a very good relationship with Prime Minister Modi, as you know, and he will continue to have that.
While the India and US have been deepening defense and technology ties, trade negotiations have progressed slowly amid thorny issues like tariffs, market access, and digital trade. Still, officials from both countries have signaled that a breakthrough is near, with sources hinting at a phased agreement that could be unveiled as early as mid-July. Now we move on to our next news. Clashes erupted in Istanbul after a satirical magazine was accused of publishing a cartoon depicting the Prophet Muhammad, sparking outrage, arrests, and a government crackdown. Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets as an angry mob of up to 300 people gathered outside a bar frequented by staff of Liman, one of Turkey's longest-running satirical publications. The unrest followed arrest orders from the Istanbul prosecutor over an image in the magazine's June 26th issue. The cartoon, which circulated widely online, showed two men greeting each other amid an aerial bombardment, one named Muhammad, the other named Musa. Officials claimed it insulted religious values, while the magazine insists it referred to a common name, not the Prophet. Editor-in-chief Tuncay Akgün, speaking from Paris, said the image was not a caricature of the Prophet and warned that authorities had distorted the cartoon to stoke provocation. Turkish police have arrested the cartoonist, the editor, and graphic designer. Officials have taken control of the magazine's offices in Istiklal Avenue, while arrest warrants have been issued for several other executives. Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya called the cartoon vile, and Justice Minister Yilmaz Tunç said an investigation had been launched for publicly insulting religious values. Critics of the government say the incident is being used to target press freedom. Liman, founded in 1991, has long been a bastion of opposition satire in Turkey. Editor Tuncay Akgün warned that comparisons to Charlie Hebdo, the French magazine targeted by Islamist gunmen in 2015, were very intentional and worrying. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.